If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode where I have a guest by the name of Jason Browne. Jason is a masterful storyteller and seasoned speaker. He has a book coming out along with a new podcast that I can't wait to hear. He recently captivated audiences with a TEDx talk offering a surprising perspective on the topic of both his book and his podcast, The Transformative Possibilities of Privilege. So you already know why he's joining me today. Thanks for coming on, Jason. Welcome to the 3E podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me on your podcast. I'm looking so much forward to digging into all these wonderful topics.
Yes, the topic of privilege. But before that, one of the things I say, I hate to read people's whole bios. I would rather have you tell us about you because you have a very interesting, I almost want to call you a Renaissance man, right? So tell us about Jason.
Well, I'll tell you some random things first. I love kayaking. That's something I enjoy doing. I do not like washing dishes. That's a thing that I'm not like, if I have to choose between the chores, that's not one of them. And I'm really good at making music. So that's some 3 random things. But a few things about me. I did IT for 15 years after graduating college, and I felt like I was put into this box. And I'm in IT. I'm supposed to be, behind a computer doing nerd stuff. And I really felt like there was more to what I was meant to do. So after I left my IT job, I really started digging into many different areas, trying to be creative. And I found and I gravitated towards public speaking. So I've been public speaking around the globe largely for a group called Rotary International. I got into radio for 7 years. I won a couple awards there. And I dabbled into video game streaming during the pandemic, made a few bucks doing that. And so I've been just doing a number of different things in different spaces, really trying to hone in creativity and bridging the gap between that and conveying messages that really, truly resonate with people.
Wow. Video game streaming. Well, you have a radio voice.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. I'll give all props to my dad about that.
Okay. And for those people who are only listening, he doesn't have a radio face, what I would call a radio face. So I would.
Well, thank you. I think thank you on that regard. Thank you.
That is a compliment. We say some people have a face made for radio. No, not Jason. So hopefully folks who are listening to this will also check out some of the video for today. But let's talk about privilege. There are so many different types of privilege, right? And I think the one that comes to most people's mind is racial privilege because that's the one that's so prevalent in the United States. So let's start there. How would you define racial privilege?
Racial privilege, I would say that is the advantage given to the probability of advantage granted to a particular race in a particular country at a particular time. So largely in the United States, a lot of people think of white privilege. You say privilege, out of context, they think white privilege. And then they immediately think of, what are you going to blame me for? Right? What are you going to make me feel guilty for? And that's one that's very contextual to the United States. Like that racial dynamic between white privilege and that being the privilege that appears to often have the most amount of access and ability. That's the United States. I mean, you could also argue like places like South Africa and Australia and places around the world too. Yeah. But if you were to go to India, the situation might be different. If you were to go to Japan, what racial privilege would look like is going to be different. And so if you go to Rwanda, that's going to be different. So racial privilege really depends on a number of factors, including time and location and the probability of whether it exists in the first place for the individual.
Right. So if we, I do have an international audience, but like 90% of my listeners are in the U.S. So I'm going to skew that way, especially since we're going to talk about education. And one of the things that that I see in my work is that racial privilege, white racial privilege, is prevalent. It's predominant. And it's filtering down in many different ways. But there is also a privilege that comes with education, right? You're an educated person. You have a master's degree, MBA, right?
I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
From Penn State. Both from Penn State, yeah.
Okay. So I won't hold that against you, Penn State. No.
Fair enough.
Okay. I'm a California girl. Nothing against Pennsylvania. It's just, I'm an Aggie, Cal Aggie to that effect, because there are Aggies everywhere. But there is privilege that comes with higher education. And even once you're in higher ed, that extra that comes with getting a master's or with getting a doctorate, a PhD, EDD, whatever doctorate you get. And so as Black folks, as people of color, even within our own communities of color, you and I have this little bit of extra privilege that comes because we are educated individuals, right? So when you talk to folks about the transformative possibilities of privilege, what is it that is that transformation? Where's that come from?
So the transformation comes from this, a place of opportunity. So while you and I, as educated Black folks, have more opportunity and more access and more ability because of our degree, there's a certain responsibility that comes with that. There's a certain expectation that should come with that because we have more privilege than others. You might argue that you and I, just based on our education, are considerably more privileged than a great deal of white folks or a great deal of Asian folks in the United States, right? Just based upon the educational aspect, if you were just to hyper focus on that. But again, my definition is based upon location, probability, and individuality for that particular, for whoever is being in question. So the possibilities that exist, this opportunity that exists for us, is saying, in the spaces in which folks, Black folks, white folks, can get an education, have that education, what are better ways for us to activate the privileges that exist in that space to maybe even provide more opportunities and more educational access for those that don't have it? It is, instead of focusing on the fact that many Black folks don't have that level of education or don't have access to the ability to get there, it's saying, with the few that do, what can we do with that? And how do we pull those resources together to make some sort of difference?
Okay, so what you're talking about, going to sort of break it down for listeners, is that,
sure,
as I see, or as I'm hearing it, is that community, right? Within your community, your broader community, your community of color, if you are LGBTQ individual within your community, so whatever community you're in, when you have privilege within that community, as you said, time and place, space, that we have a responsibility. So I, as a Black woman with an education, I have a responsibility within the Black community to do good things and help other people because I have been afforded that privilege that comes with education.
Yes, that's completely true. You've been afforded education, and now and that is a privilege that you have. Now you can detail what those privileges are as a result of it, but whatever they are for you, I'm suggesting that you should be able to use that to help yourself and other people along the way, whatever that means to you. I hope that it's like, get more people that look like us into colleges to get past certain barriers in public education so that they can be successful in ways that generationally they have not been successful. And that is what we have the ability to do. But it's a lot easier said than done. And it's not a lot easier said than done. And it's one of those things that education, just this broad topic of getting a degree, there are so many facets of privilege that you could take this in a million different directions, and it's still, in my mind, would be okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a personal question. How do you use your privilege?
Sure. So this is something that I work on a regular basis. So one, I have to catalog and understand what privileges that I have. Now, this is a process that's very self-reflective. It's very vulnerable. You have to challenge some of the notions that one might have. Real quick, if I may interject, one of the aspects of this topic is this concept of earned versus unearned privilege. And so I don't differentiate between the two. I think that while there is some benefit to understanding that, for the sake of this conversation, I don't care if you earned it or you didn't earn it. You have privilege, and therefore you do something with it. So you have it. So when I think about my life, and like you mentioned, let's just go from what you mentioned from the onset of this conversation. Jason, you have a great radio voice. Okay, I have the privilege of having a voice that people don't mind listening to, right? Even me saying that out loud seems very like, oh, you're patting yourself on the back. No, what I'm doing is recognizing a privilege that I do have. And now I'm saying to myself, what can I do with it to benefit others? And that, I was born with it. Like I said, my pop gave it to me, right? Like that wasn't something that I earned, although I do craft my ability to speak. But that is a privilege that I now take and I use to, I think hopefully it's fullest. And so when I think about that, and when I think about a talent, when I think about an ability, I use that. When I think about the fact that I use also my privileges as way of reminders. So I'm looking at my Brita filter across the room. It's halfway full. It's a full gallon of Brita. It's a clean water I could drink, and I probably could drink out the tap, but I have a Brita filter. So I'm super privileged in the fact that I can walk 6 feet and grab a glass of water. Yeah. The reminder of that makes me appreciate the simplicity of that action, and I value my time much more because I've learned about folks who travel 2 hours a day to go grab a bucket full of water for folks. Now,
I immediately thought of the kids in Flint, Michigan, who don't have clean water to drink, even though they're in the United States in a metropolitan area, right? And these aren't things that we typically think about. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just
No, it's good.
Yeah, that is such a connective piece of tissue, so to speak, especially for people who work in schools, where there are schools that I've been into where they have to give the kids bottled water because the tap water in the school in America, in a city, is not safe for children to drink.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And now once that realization is made, right? So think about it this way. So I'm going to paint a picture one. Students in school have to drink bottled water. Okay, that's not that. You're like, okay, fine, they have to drink bottled water. Students in school cannot drink the water that is coming out of the faucet, and so then the school has to go out of their way to provide bottled water to the students, which also adds additional logistics to the school students and the school. Okay, I have the convenience of going over to the sink, but those students don't. Now, what does that impact for them as a result of it? Me understanding the privilege of having easy access to water gives me more insight to the conditions and the impact for the students that do not have that privilege. It not only allows, it doesn't always mean, my suggestion and my approach to this doesn't always result in direct action, but it will result in an amplification of empathy and understanding to the conditions of other people, so that you can say, oh, no, those students are going through at least a layer greater than the rest of the students in the rest of the United States. Now, other students are going through other greater levels of privilege, but those students have that layer that they have to work through, and it impacts them, and it's not something that I should be taking for granted at all.
Yeah. You said, and it's something that when we sit back and reflect on it, you have a great radio voice. You know, when you accept that or you catalog your privileges, some of it may sound like you're patting yourself on the back. I had an amazing, I hate to call her a boss. She was I reported to her in the corporate world. She never acted like a boss. She was, I had two females that I reported to at some point in time who were just amazing people. But one of the things she said to me, her name was Phoebe. She said, I didn't feel good talking about myself. And she said, Mitra, if you don't toot your own horn, somebody else will use it as a spittoon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was pretty. When she said that, I thought about it and I said, Yeah, I guess if I'm not the one, if I can't be my own best promoter, best advocate, recognize my talents, abilities, privileges as we talk about that, and use that for me, use that to do some good, somebody else will just stomp on me. Right? Because there's somebody else who has less ability, less talent, less education, whatever, who will elevate themselves because they don't really give a rat's spit about me and their focus and goal is different. So, I say that to say to every listener who has, any talent, any privilege that they can now, as you sit back and reflect, think about and say, you know what? Yeah, I can use this, or my child has this. I can encourage them to build upon that, use that gift, that privilege, that talent, and advocate for themselves.
Right. One other thing, one thing I want to note to this is not only will they have the potential of stomping on you because you're not recognizing them or taking advantage of those privileges that you've been granted, but other people may activate them and use them for themselves and leave and not allow you to manifest and use them for yourself. So what is just the idea of someone being able to take, since we're on the topic of my voice, take my voice and use it for their agenda, their motives, their blankety blank. If I don't understand that, and if I'm not recognizing that privilege that I have and how I can use it for the values that I think that are important, and I only allow external things to impact that, then the potential for what I truly believe in and the greater good that I see is not really being manifested. It's not really being realized. And so not only can you be stomped on, but you can be used in ways that you might not even realize.
Well, I'm using you right now, right? I'm using you to help.
Yeah.
I'm using you to help get a message out, right? Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm also choosing, this exchange is also an exchange of I recognize the work that you're doing. And I was like, this is a place where I want to share my voice. You saw me and this is an individual who I want to bring into the fold to also communicate and amplify the voices and the topics that I'm talking about. So there's a mutual understanding and a connection point that exists here. If I chose to not want to use my voice, and if you chose not to use your abilities to create and craft these messages, then we would never be talking. This conversation may impact one human being, one person somewhere. And because of that connection, that realization, and our understanding of our privileges, we are now at least impacting that one person that's sitting there being like, oh, this is good. This resonates with me, and now I can do something greater with my own privilege.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's funny, but it's also true.
Yeah. Hey, as long as there is a mutual respect, I would say, and a mutual understanding, go ahead. I say to people all the time, use me. However, I can be useful for good, right? I don't mind being used, just, don't use me up. But it has to be for the good, and it has to be for something that I feel good about doing as well, which for me
Absolutely.
is to do good things for children and the communities that serve them.
Yeah.
I had a question. Ask me one, or tell us something else. Just tell us something else.
So one of the things that this whole book about privilege comes from, and this concept, this conversation of privilege, is something that has been lingering in the back of my mind growing up. So I had speaking of education, I had the privilege, I haven't told this to many folks. I had the privilege of going to what's called a magnet school, a school that, people who are deemed to be smart get to go to. Now, I went to, into this.
Pin in that for just a second, so my listeners don't think, because there are a lot of misconceptions about magnet schools and charter schools. So they look different from place to place. In some places, the magnet schools are schools that have a focus on the basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's magnet schools. There are arts magnets. There are music magnets. There are language magnets. So kids who want to be immersed in a language other than English from kindergarten on, right? They can go to a Spanish magnet, a Chinese magnet, or whatever. So I just want people to understand that magnets are public schools. They are free. They are open to everyone, but different districts use them different ways. So, okay.
Oh, I actually had no idea that was the case. So thank you for informing me and letting me know this. So in my particular case, it was, I from what I remember about Philadelphia, I grew up in Philly. there were few magnet schools, and the magnet school that I went to was focused on academic excellence in some sort of way. The way that I got into the school was something that is something that I still, growing up in school, it still like scratched my brain. So my dad knew, he worked at a community college that was right next door, and knew a bunch of the people that were on the acceptance committee for the school. And when I applied and whatever, I didn't really care. My parents did all the application stuff, but my dad was in the room with these people that were making these decisions. And so it was my father's effort and communication style and the work that he put up until that point that maybe I would have gotten it anyway, but maybe not. His voice was the confirmation, the nail in the coffin. I guess that's usually used in a bad way. The thing that pushed it over the edge.
It was,
so that I
he
got
was the
into
tipping
school.
point. The tipping
point. That's a better analogy. The tipping point that got me into this magnet school in 5th grade. And even then I was like, that feels weird. That my father was able to change the trajectory of my life based upon a conversation. What is that? I didn't really think about it for a while, but it always hovered in my brain of being like, there's something that needs to be explored in this space. Fast forward, I'm in after I graduate college, and I've already gotten my master's, and I've already gotten my career started and figured out education's important. I'm in the middle. I traveled to India because I went there because I was giving a speech, and I decided to explore India as a result of this. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to remove all of the privileges that I have and just go explore. You know what? I can do this. I am not tied to the privileges that I have. I'm not tied to all this. And over 2 weeks, I bounced around to different places using my privilege to buy plane tickets and whatnot. And I got exposed to India by myself in a way that transformed and made me realize all the way back then when I got into that school of what was really going on. These seemingly small things that exist, these timings that exist, the privileges that exist, change the trajectory of people's lives. And we often say, especially as I'm standing in the middle of